Hello and welcome to Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics, the podcast dedicated to reviewing animated films from the past and seeing which ones are worthy of being called a true classic, albeit in our case, a Waly Gisnep animated classic. My name is Ben and joining me as always is my good friend Liam. Liam, what film are we looking at this time?
This time, Ben, we are taking a look at the first official Studio Ghibli film, Castle in the Sky, the first film produced after the studio was set up following the enormous success of Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Now, I mentioned at the end of our last podcast that this was going to be my first time watching this film. Ben, what is your history with Castle in the Sky?
So prior to us revisiting these films, I'd seen about half the Studio Ghibli films at some point in my life, and this was one of them. My recollection of it was that I enjoyed it more than Nausicaa, and I felt that this, in my memory, was just a better version of that film. That's not necessarily what I think now. So I guess we're coming from two very different perspectives with it.
Yeah, and once again, this is a film that, as it was my first time watching, I decided to watch the dub. I'm very happy to see both Mark Hamill and Jim Cummings in this film, which was very, very nice. Always happy when they show up as voice actors.
We did get a little bit of Mark Hamill in the last one, but he was barely in it.
Oh, yeah. And luckily as well, there's no Shia LaBeouf this time.
He's always there, though, isn't he? In your mind.
We do have James Van Der Beek, though, instead, which I'm fine with. I'm a big...
Beaker? Is that what you call?
I was going to say like a beakhead, but a Van Der Beek head, I guess it would be. Love me some Dawson's Creek. And also Don't Trust the Bitch in Apartment. I can never remember the number, I think 23, where James Van Der Beek is in it as James Van Der Beek, which is always fun for an actor to do.
Well, as per the last time I watched the sub, so, yep, it's got some Japanese voice actors, some of whom I think are famous, some of them aren't, and once again, a lot of the intonation and delivery was lost on me because I don't speak Japanese.
Clearly, we've made the correct decision to bring our expertise to these internationally renowned films.
When are Ben and Liam going to weigh in on these, damn it?
And yeah, you mentioned sort of having a preference between this and Nausicaa. And wow, what an incredibly bold move to follow up the success of Nausicaa with a film that is very, very similar.
I mean, you say that jokingly, but you know, after The Little Mermaid, they basically just started working on Beauty and the Beast, right?
Okay, that's fair. I just feel that as Nausicaa was very much focused on world building and this sci-fi idea of, you know, warring nations, and I'm not entirely sure what Castle in the Sky brings to the table that Nausicaa didn't already do. Not to say at this point whether I think one does it better than the other, and there are some differences. I just think it's very bold to just this be the follow-up. Like, if the follow-up was Kiki's Delivery Service and then Castle in the Sky, I'd be like, fair enough.
I am expecting Miyazaki to eventually reach a singularity where he releases a film called Howl's Moving Castle of Cagliostro in the Sky.
Oh, God, we forgot about the Castle of Cagliostro. You know what? We're not doing it.
We'll come back to it at some point. It's fine. There's plenty of time. Let's dive into Castle in the Sky then. And my first note is, damn, this is some in medias res shit, because we start with a huge flying skyship thing, and some pirates land on it, and they're shooting everyone, and a girl is being chased, and she punches her seeming captor or bodyguard, and then falls off the side of the plane, all within the space of a couple of minutes, and you're just like, what the hell is going on?
This is a really stressful opening, and a huge contrast to the opening, actually, of Nausicaa. Presumed kidnapped girl escaping and falling from the sky. I think this is great. Once again, Studio Ghibli showing that, my word, during the 80s, they were the people to beat when it came to animated action.
That's our opening. We don't really get a lot of explanation until quite a bit later on, and then we get a credit sequence that I just adore, and it's all this industrial settings. Now, Miyazaki was very clear that he visited a Welsh mining town in the 80s, and this was hugely inspired by it. And, I mean, as someone who comes from Wales, not necessarily a Welsh mining town, Liam, what are your thoughts on all this?
Well, that's really strange, actually, because a few years ago, I actually visited an old slate mine in the heart of Wales. and there was this village built on top, and the houses were built of slate. And watching this film, I kept thinking, this reminds me of that old slate mining village. So well done, Miyazaki. You nailed it. I had mixed feelings about this opening. I think it's beautiful. I mean, the film's called Castle in the Sky. We know there's going to be a castle in the sky, but maybe don't show it us right away.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, I suppose, like, the comparison point to Nausicaa is that in that we see...
Nausicaa straight away. So... if it's in the name...
True, but in the Nausicaa opening credits, we do also see, the history of the world and this great 7 days of fire and how all this got burned, which doesn't come up in the plot till a lot later. But I suppose there's a difference between telling us stuff that's happened in the past and going, by the way, this is what the film's about. They're all going to be heading towards this castle in the sky. And
it's interesting as well because there's kind of a central mystery at the heart of this film. And I will admit, I was really engrossed by it and I didn't quite know where it was going the whole time, but I knew it was leading towards this place, and I had an idea of what this place was like because of these opening sequences, and maybe that's what they wanted, but I just feel maybe a bit more air of mystery wouldn't have gone amiss. But post-credits, we see a young boy from this mining village. I want to call him Pazuzu, but that's the demon from The Exorcist. So this young boy from the mining village, Pazu, who sees the girl who jumped from the airship before, well, I don't think she intentionally jumped, floating down from the sky with a light floating nearby her, which she showed to be part of a gem on her necklace, which, again, I mentioned in our discussion of Nausicaa, of it being fascinating seeing the origin of so many JRPG tropes, but this idea of, like, a princess falling from the sky is so common, and it's really cool seeing the origin of that trope, really. Or at very least what popularised it.
We also get another trope here, and I don't know how much this is JRPG-ish. I'd say to a degree. But it's definitely something we're going to see more and more in Studio Ghibli films, and that's these big epic storylines told through the eyes of children or very young characters. We got that somewhat in Nausicaa, in that we had Nausicaa herself and the other sort of young prince and princess. But I feel these characters they're definitely children in this, rather than maybe sort of young teenagers.
Ben, my man, if you take a war-torn world being seen through the eyes of children, all you're missing to make it a JRPG is have them fight God at the end. Do they fight God at the end of this film? No.
No, definitely not. I mean, I suppose that's what we all want from life, really, isn't it? To fight God at the end. So yeah, we're introduced to Pazu, as you say, who's incredibly strong. I describe him as, like, stocky and, I guess, dense is the word I'd always use to describe Pazu. Not, like, emotionally dense, but physically dense. And yeah, he saves this girl who's fallen from the sky. And none of the adults really seem to care that this has happened.
Well, yeah, they're busy mining.
The only time you're allowed to stop mining is fighting people who aren't from your town. Those are the rules.
Because, yeah, Pazu takes this girl, who says her name is Sheeta, and he takes her back to his house where he lives alone. He's an orphan. And explaining how he found her falling from the sky and, floating near the ground, he tells her about his dream to find the city of Laputa, which he knows exists because his father took a picture of it one day when he was out flying, and so he's working on building a flying machine so that he can escape the town and find the city of Laputa, which is this sort of mythical city in the sky that has fallen into legend and no one really believes is real. But obviously Pazu has a picture of it and knows, like, this is his life's goal, is to take to the skies and find this place.
So when you were saying what does this film do that Nausicaa doesn't, I feel already one thing it does is have a clear focus. We've got two young characters who want to find Laputa, the castle in the sky. Everyone else wants to find it as well, but we'll get to that. But fundamentally they want to find it just for the sort of thrill of the, not even thrill of the adventure, they want to find it for the discovery and for finding somewhere that's magical and different, which is different to what everyone else wants it for. And
talking of everyone else wanting to find it, we're kind of introduced through this first act to our two rival factions, specifically the Sky Pirates, who we saw in the opening sequence, led by Captain Dola, and the military/government. And I think, unlike in Nausicaa, these two factions are distinct enough that they work as opposing factions as a greater conflict that the children can sort of view the story through.
Just on the characters of Sheeta and Pazu, I really like this relationship. I think it really is a central strength to this film. It helps do a lot of the lifting in terms of buy-in and moving the plot forward, because unlike the world of Nausicaa, which is quite fantastical, you've got these unknowable alien insects and this huge sort of sea of decay that's spreading, and you've got all this stuff going on. In this film, it's a lot more grounded, pun intended. There's not all these magical elements, and so when Sheeta has this crystal that does do magical stuff, that's a big deal. And I think the more of those elements we introduce, the easier it is to accept. Because they're children, they're young characters, and they're just excited and adventurous, they are not reacting to stuff how adult characters would, or how we as an audience might if we were in that situation. And I just think they're very fun as well, like when Pazu brings her back, the way he... I've just got a note, Liam, I'm just going to read it. The best way to wake up the strange sky girl is a trumpet solo.
Oh, I want to talk about this trumpet solo. This was so nostalgic for me, this shot of Pazu playing the trumpet on top of the hill, and it sort of sweeps down, and we see some seagulls flying, and the trumpet is playing. It's just the menu screen of every JRPG ever. And I was just like, this is wonderful. And again, it's so fascinating to me to see the origins of all of these tropes. And I know that, I'm talking about a trumpet here, this isn't the origin of trumpets, but...
That's a different film.
I feel this definitely popularised that sound for, small towns in JRPGs. It's just a beautiful introduction to the village. But Sheeta sort of explains that, where she came from, that, she was taken by the government and now the Sky Pirates are after her. And before long, the Sky Pirates come to the village looking for her. They manage to track her down. And so Pazu, with the help of the villagers, helps Sheeta escape. I really enjoy these Sky Pirates. I think that immediately the animators are having a lot of fun visually with them. Like the implication seems to be that they're all one big family and they're all Captain Dola's sons. And the sons are these big lumbering fools who their disguise to show that they're not Sky Pirates is they just wear lots of formal wear when walking around this mining town, and they just stand out like a sore thumb. And it's just very fun as a sequence.
Yeah, again, doing the Nausicaa comparison, there's fun in this film. Not everything is bleak and horrible all the time. And yeah, these characters, I think, epitomise that. As mentioned, they do immediately just start having a street brawl with the locals.
And Sheeta and Pazu manage to escape, but as they're escaping, they eventually get into a chase with the pirates on this rail. Again, the action sequences in this film, once again, are just fantastic. And it's at this point that the government shows up, coming the other way on the rails. And now it's like, oh, okay, you're trapped between these two factions. We need to escape. So Pazu and Sheeta basically just jump. They know that they'll be okay. They know that Sheeta's amulet will save her. They jump into the mine, leaving the Sky Pirates and the government above, looking on, seeing proof that they found the right person, but, unable to follow them.
There's a bit of a trope that when you're a kid, quicksand seems like it's going to be a real problem for you as an adult, right? That was definitely true for me as a kid. But another thing was the fear that when I'm on a train, there could just be a train coming the other way on the same set of tracks. Now, I assume that doesn't happen very often in the real world because it's basically a guaranteed disaster. But it does happen in this, and it felt incredibly stressful.
It's really good. As a director, Miyazaki certainly knows how to create tension through this action, and the animators know how to bring that to life. I think it's fantastically done. Meanwhile, at the bottom of the mines, where Sheeta's amulet floats them to safety, they meet Uncle Pom, who is this sort of eccentric miner in the village who's down there sort of exploring the Ethereum.
He lives in a cave, Liam. He's a weird bearded man who gets everyone to call him Uncle, and he lives in a cave.
And he explains that the amulet is made of pure Ethereum, which is a mineral that they mine and refine in the village, though, the skills to refine it are fading, and to have a piece of Ethereum pure that is that as large as this tiny gem on the amulet is incredibly rare and powerful. So we're sort of thinking, okay, well, this is what the government is after and what the Sky Pirates are after.
My note on this section, Liam, is there's some excellent fried egg animation. in this film.
Yeah, the food animation is fantastic in this. There's a weird thing though, and I hope someone can clarify this, but I always find that when there is any kind of bread in Japanese animation specifically, the bread is always incredibly square and incredibly thick. Is that a reflection of, like, you know, bread available in Japan? Because to me, I think of, you know, the traditional bread shape where it's popped out over the edge of the pan and it has that, like, little muffin top, and it's also, we slice it a bit thin. Whereas whenever I've seen bread in Japanese animation, it's just these incredibly chunky squares.
So if you've got any Japanese bakers listening, you could let us know.
Also, don't put a fried egg on some toast if you're just going to eat the fried egg and then eat the toast. Just have them on separate plates. Like, they make a sandwich and it's like an open top sandwich, and just eat the top of the sandwich, and it's like, okay, that was a bit pointless.
Liam, I hear what you're saying about the bread, but I need to talk about the animation on the eggs some more. The way it fries is incredibly satisfying to watch. The way Pazu slices the fried egg in half, the texture and the sort of semi-solid movement of it is, I mean, it's right up there with the photocopier from Bolt. and I do not say that lightly.
I appreciate that, but all I can think of is the breakfast scene in Howl's Moving Castle. My anticipation for that sequence is just building instead, and it's just a world away, Ben, still. But it's an impressive egg, I'll give you that. I was just let down by the bread.
So Pazu and Sheeta, they leave the mine and are basically immediately captured by the government. And this is where we get to the point where it's fairly clear these aren't just like, oh, this is for your own protection. These are bad guys because they, like, absolutely twat Pazu and then just take them both away against their own will. And the place they take them again, and this is where we continue to get this Ghibli theme of strange mashups of European history and architecture, because we've had this industrial Welsh mining village and now we've got basically like a medieval castle with guns on as the government's main fortress.
Yeah, I enjoy that this government is so clearly villainous. Whereas, you know, in Nausicaa, there was more of an element of like, well, humanity's just rotten to the core and it's a result of growing up in just a war-torn world. These are so clearly just like a villainous empire wanting to take over the world. Like, that's what we have here. I kind of like that simplicity, particularly as you say, we're looking at this through the eyes of children. That works really well. We get this sequence where one of the government ministers, Colonel Muska, voiced wonderfully by Mark Hamill, just telling you that, you know, he's the villain, because that's what you do when you want a villain. You cast Mark Hamill. In voice acting, at least. Also entirely depends on your interpretation of The Last Jedi, but let's not go there.
I think that's a film that people have fairly uncontroversial views about.
And he explains this history of Laputa and that they're looking for Laputa and that she is the key, because he reveals that he knows her true name, where she is, you know, descendant from Laputan royalty. And he basically makes an agreement. He's like, look, if you help us, we'll let Pazu go. He'll be free. Like, you know, he's no danger to us. He's not done anything that he needs to be punished for. But if you don't help us, we will hurt him. And so Sheeta sends Pazu away, who returns home just completely, you know, defeated by this. He formed this bond with Sheeta, and now she's just like, no, you just need to go home and leave me. I'll be fine with the government.
Do you think Muska is motivated by having an enormous forehead?
I must find this city. It's the only thing bigger than my forehead.
I like the way Muska's done because, spoiler warning, he's the primary antagonist, but he's certainly not initially, and I think it's done quite well because he very much seems to be in line with the sort of governmental military, and then we gradually get more and more evidence that he's using them for his own means. And this kind of comes back to your suggestion with the way to improve the human conflict in Nausicaa of having, like, ostensibly one unified body that is constantly splintering because of backstabbing and self-betrayal, which I think is maybe better than just two rival nations that are at conflict. And again, I think having, rather than two pretty similar empires, having this powerful military empire and then these sort of ramshackle sky pirates, again, they're both acting selfishly, but the visual distinction is a lot more interesting.
I mean, this is the first of several points where I promise I will shut up about how these films influenced JRPGs, but I genuinely didn't see it coming that he was going to be, the big villain and was going to backstab the government. I thought he would be, part of the the military, and that the military was the villain. And then the reveal that actually, no, he's out for his own selfish reasons and is going to backstab everyone else. I was like, I've seen this dozens and dozens of times in JRPGs, and I did not see this coming. I just think it's done very well.
I think a lot of it comes down to direction as well, is that he's just, early on, he's not often the focus of shots necessarily. And even the way he's drawn and animated, I swear, in the earlier parts of the film, there's less detail on him. And then, as he becomes more and more the focus in terms of plot, he looks different and there seems to be more detail and stuff. I don't know. I found it quite hard to explain or articulate, but I definitely feel a lot of that is down to the direction and the animation of the character.
And so Muska shows Sheeta this robot that's fallen from the sky. And it's like, look, we know that Laputa is real, and we know that you're the key to finding it. You are going to help us. You can't deny this anymore. We know this is real. This is happening. And we get this really nice sequence, actually, where we've had this idea that Sheeta was taught some spells by her grandmother, and one of the spells she knows inadvertently activates this robot that just goes on a rampage in the castle, trying to both, rescue Sheeta and also destroy its attackers, the ones that, it feels are a threat. Again, just showing that Studio Ghibli just does action and fire and destruction unlike anyone else at this time.
I absolutely adore this robot design. It's got these really, really, really long arms. I think it's similar to the thing I like about the Ohm in Nausicaa I think it just looks so otherworldly. We got a couple of images of Laputa and we've had the crystal up to this point, but the visual design of this robot just tells us this is a society, a culture that is completely different to everything else we know about. It's such a visually striking... I mean, you said it in our last podcast. Nobody does explosions like Ghibli.
Meanwhile, back in the village, Pazu has gone home sort of despondently and sees that Dola and the Sky Pirates have set up shop in his house. And are like, right, we want that girl. She has what we're after. And when they sort of talk, they realise that, maybe the pirates aren't as antagonistic or villainous as they first seemed, but, clearly they don't have altruistic goals here. But Pazu's like, okay, you just want the necklace. I want to help my friend. We can work together. And signs up and becomes a Sky Pirate. They've got a mutual goal and so decide to work together, boarding the airship and heading back to the castle to rescue Sheeta and the amulet, respectively. And they arrive just in the midst of all this destruction, and it's complete chaos. The military's airship has been completely destroyed. The castle is burning to the ground, but they manage to rescue Sheeta, but in the process lose the amulet, which at this point has been activated as a guiding beacon, revealing the location of Laputa.
So the bad guys are on the way to Laputa, and Sheeta and Pazu's only option is to become a Sky Pirate, even though they're going to be ostracised from society. I mean, they're not really losing a lot because they were already fairly ostracised, so I guess it's fine.
These two orphans have so much to lose.
I think this upcoming section might be my favourite part of this film. So first off, I just love the Sky Pirates ship, because ship is such a strong word. It is a sky ship like the other ones we've seen, but it's also their home. So everything is so living dense. So there's laundry pinned up along the deck. The propellers on either side of it are also rooms that they live in. You've got this piping communication system that's built into it. I love all the design of that.
I hadn't really appreciated how impressive it is because, once again, the idea of an airship that is also someone's home is something I'm just so used to. I think of things like Skies of Arcadia, and that's what comes to mind. But obviously all these are rooted in this, the creativity to bring these ships to life. Again, clearly Miyazaki has got such a love for aeronautics.
To the point where, what I think, more than any film I've seen, this film captures how it feels to be in the sky. Do you know what I mean by that? The movement and the motion and the atmosphere in both senses of the word. I feel like I am on a skyship that's tens of thousands of feet above the earth. It's so evocative, this whole section. The second half of this film It basically all takes place up in the sky, and it really, really brings you there.
It's wonderful. They're chasing after one of the government's airships, which is on the way to Laputa. They know they can go faster, but there's so much cloud, and they're just sort of heading in the direction. There's an amazing sequence where, to get a better view, there's a crow's nest at the top of the pirate's airship, and it can be released into kind of like flying kite on a string, or a wire, I suppose. A string would be stupid and dangerous and very brave. Yeah. And Pazu and Sheeta go into the crow's nest and they just set it loose. And as soon as they release, it just, flies upwards in the wind filling the sails of the kite. And it's moving behind the ship and it's swaying from side to side and giving them that look. And it's just a fantastic sequence where the animators are having so much fun. It reminds me of the fun that animators were having in Treasure Planet, thinking, how do we bring this 70-30 rule and this world to life? And where this doesn't have like a clear rule they have to follow, it's clear that there's a lot of love for this idea of sky pirates and this ship in particular.
You mentioned about Sheeta and Pazu being sat in the crow's nest together. There's a really sweet sequence where they're just kind of talking, really, and I really, really like that. Because of how young these characters are, there's not romance here. These characters don't really have that kind of awareness yet, which I think is really sweet. There's a nice bit where Dola's kind of eavesdropping in on them, and Pazu's kind of saying like, oh, she's not as bad as she seems and stuff, and she sort of begrudgingly accepts it. Really humanises those characters who up to that point, like, you may have found fun, you may have found a bit irritating. I think it really kind of helps draw them in. There's a nice cameo by Dr. Eggman, who works in the engine room.
Oh, yeah.
The only downside in this sequence to me is there's quite an unpleasant subplot of all Dola's sons having a crush on Sheeta, who is a child, because they think she's going to grow up to be like their mum. What the hell's that about?
It's wrong on so many levels.
And just to be clear, like, this isn't me and Liam saying, oh, there's a kind of subtext here. It's very, very clear that is what's happening.
Oh, and the whole bit where Sheeta's job on the ship is cleaning and cooking, and I think all boys are really happy that someone will be cooking for a change, and just thinking, who did this? Like, what did they do and eat beforehand?
Fried egg.
Are they so entrenched in their toxic masculinity that, well, there's not a woman other than mum on ship, so, no one's gonna cook?
I think it's meant to be funny, and it's meant to be the idea of, like, yeah, at the start of the film they present themselves as these big tough men, but really they're just little mummies boys and they're emotionally immature, and I'm like, that's cool and all, but they are still grown-ups, and she still is a child.
Eventually then, the pirates catch up to the government's airship, and they're being led to Laputa, but they can't find it. And what we see is this giant pillar of cloud, and the animation on this cloud is so beautiful, and Pazu recognises this and is like, that's Laputa. I know from my dad's stories, like, that behind the clouds is Laputa. We have to go into the clouds. And so he drives the kite into it, and there's just this fantastic storm on the inside. Clearly it's some magical or, advanced technological protection that the city is creating for itself.
It's all very 2001, this bit. You do get vertical pillars of light on either side of this tunnel.
Oh, yeah, the transition into Laputa.
And then Laputa's just a giant baby in space, isn't it, Liam?
Well, what it turns out to be is just this, as we sort of said, this giant floating city. But this was the moment where I went, hang on, I've seen this before, because would you believe it, in Final Fantasy XI, specifically the expansion Rise of the Xylart, there is a floating city in the sky which is long abandoned, overgrown, and is just being guarded by these ceramic, robots that protect it. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, this is where that's from. And from that point on, I was like, I think I know everywhere the plot is going to go, because it's just... It turns out that Square Enix, just years later, just stole this plot.
So, because Ghibli and Miyazaki were so influential on Final Fantasy, and because we were talking about every Disney film, this podcast is just moving inexorably towards Kingdom Hearts, isn't it?
Yeah, I've yet to see the influence of I say I've yet to see the influence of Kingdom Hearts. We've just gone through every Disney film.
What I love about the arrival at Laputa is I feel this sequence is really, really earned. I guess the best Disney comparison would be Atlantis: The Lost Empire, which definitely spends time on everything, but because it's trying to cut down to a 90-minute film, everything feels so rushed, and they try and cram so much into it. But here we go, we've been building up to this for well over an hour now. We're just going to take some time to enjoy this. And it's a beautiful sequence where Pazu and Sheeta, they've crash landed their little glider, and it's silent. And there's this otherworldly architecture and this grass, and then one of these barely humanoid robots walks up to them, and initially they're scared, and it picks up their glider, and they think it's going to destroy it, and it's picked it up because they've landed on a bird's nest, and it wants the bird's nest to be safe. And as an audience, you instantly understand what's going on here. And to the Ghibli fans, it's probably not a surprise, but conflict is bad, nature is good.
I really like the Atlantis comparison, because ignoring the fact that the opening sequence kind of ruined what Atlantis was when they get there, the expedition is expecting it to be abandoned, and when they get there, the city is thriving. Whereas I'm not sure like the government or anyone in particular was expecting Laputa to be thriving, but I was thinking there was going to be a culture there, and then we get there and it's this ruin, and I was like, oh, that's really good. Like it's this decaying ruin in the sky that's just continuing to float there, and these like caretakers are still just, most of them have ceased to operate, but some of them are still there, and they're still just nurturing the nature that is there. And that's all that's there. All of this build up to what Laputa is, and it's just this surviving ruin in the sky. And I just thought it was really nice, as you say, like this just really poignant pause in all of the action. I mean, I love the sequence immediately after this where they follow the caretaker and they see this memorial to the people of Laputa and so many of the other caretakers that have just ceased to function, really giving you just this scale of how long this city has just been abandoned for.
It's maybe the first time in the film where I really have any kind of emotional connection to it, because whilst I have praised some of the elements I like up to this point, like I don't feel particular revulsion or anger towards the villains. I like the relationship between Sheeta and Pazu. I think they're fine as characters, but I don't particularly emotionally connect with them. I think the pirates are presented as fun. I don't particularly find them being fun up until the point where we actually spend some time on their ship, in which case I kind of get on board with them a bit more. But this sequence, there's just such a simple sadness to it. And again, the robot doesn't really respond. It places a flower down at this memorial, and that's about it. And it's a rare example for me of the storytelling just being absent and telling us more. We don't get later on this huge monologue where someone says what happened to everyone on Laputa. We just kind of accept that it died out and it didn't work, and that's all that's left, other than a little Jolteon again. It's the same Jolteon from Nausicaa.
Alongside this, the pirates, after the ensuing struggle outside the cloud, they've crash landed onto Laputa. The government's airship has now boarded Laputa, and troops are dismounting, ready to seize control of this. And we follow Muska
or Clement.
What's his name? And we follow Muska and the general as they've sort of finally arrived on Laputa, and sort of their motivations are revealed. The general is looking at this as, it's a mission, it's an opportunity, but clearly there's something more to this from Muska's perspective. Eventually, Muska finds Pazu and Sheeta, captures Sheeta, and using the amulet, takes her into the heart of the city. I really like this, how despite all the moss and the wildlife that's there on the surface, there's this underneath to the city that looks completely different. We go from this sort of white limestone to this metallic look, and there's these metallic cubes that make up the city, and they, using the amulet, go into the heart of the city, and no one else is able to follow them because they close the door after them. At which point, okay, yeah, Muska is clearly the villain of the piece. There's clearly more to him than meets the eye, and he has some kind of personal investment in finding Laputa. It's not just, a mission for him, which I really enjoyed, because throughout the film, he's this kind of expert on Laputa. And the whole time I was just how do they know the language? How do they know this? And how do they know that? I don't understand how this long dead civilization would have experts. And I mean, I know we have that with the Romans and whatnot, but
Rome still exists, Liam. Come on.
But the implication was that like Laputa fell into legend, like, and people didn't know it existed at all. But we get our reveal that just as Sheeta is descendant from Laputans who left Laputa to live on Earth, so too is Muska, and they both have like royal blood in them. And he sort of sees it as his birthright to return to Laputa and restore
the heart of Tafiti.
The heart of Tafiti and become a superpower again. Because one thing I really enjoy is that this is set kind of in our world, in that it talks about Sodom and Gomorrah. It has the same, mythology. And he talks about like Laputa is the fire that rained down on Sodom and Gomorrah, and he reveals that the city, this castle in the sky, is a giant weapon.
Meanwhile, Pazu is scrambling around trying to rescue the Sky Pirates, which he's not able to do, but Dole does sneak him a grenade launcher. I guess there's no other word for it. We really get a lot of Pazu climbing and using his agility and his strength in this sequence. And again, I think this is done really well. It's a bit more heavy-handed at the end of the film, but like every time he would fall into just this abyss of sky, it's always like a root or a tree branch that either he falls onto or he's able to grab, and it's always the cold metal that's either pushing him away or crumbling beneath him. It's a nice visual representation of the theming that's going on here.
Nice visual representation, but also massively anxiety-inducing.
Oh man, I mean, if the train thing was stressful, the idea of I'm holding on by like one finger, I'd fall for minutes and then die. I'll say this, the Laputans, they made some incredible technology, but they should have invented fences and handrails because they are sorely missing from this.
And so now, completely power mad, Muska reveals himself to the army. He traps them in like the base of Laputa and basically just opens the floor beneath them, sending them to their death. Also releasing just an army of these robots to attack the government's airship. It's just a great, setup for a final battle. Like, big last action sequence. And once again, super anxiety inducing because it's just in the sky above an endless abyss.
It's a very efficient way of doing it because basically it gets rid of all these soldiers and gets them out of the equation in terms of only having characters we actually know and care about left in Laputa, and also showing Big Head Muska to be the villain that he is. And there's just some really creepy stuff here. So basically he explains that himself and Sheeta are both descended from different lines of the Laputan royal family, so only they deserve to be in the throne room, which is where all the weapons and systems are operated. And he basically just says, like, you and me are going to be here forever now. But is more or less what he says, which is horrible. And so Sheeta, in desperation, kind of snatches the amulet from him. He hits her across the face, but she manages to grab it and runs off. And then, there's a bit of a chase sequence of her trying to flee from him and Pazu helping her. He's a bad guy, and he gets a gun out and he's just getting ready to shoot some children.
He might be a bad guy, but I'm just glad that unlike the pirates, he wasn't like, well, I fancy this small child. That was only implied. Implied in the sense of the idea of the royal bloodline kind of thing, and we're going to stay here forever, etc., etc. But,
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the lesson is, like, don't have your heroes and your villains be, like, really unpleasantly creepy towards children. Just a tip. So, out of desperation, Pazu and Sheeta agree that they need to use the destruction spell Sheeta was taught to destroy Laputa. It's too dangerous to be allowed to exist. And then that's what they do.
I enjoy that Sheeta's grandmother was like, I'm going to teach you this incredibly dangerous spell, but you must only ever use it in, like, a rare emergency. And she managed to not use it. I would have tried it at least I would have tried it once and then died. I'm 4.
I'm the opposite, Liam. Like, I never use consumables. I finish Pokemon games with the Master Ball still in my pocket.
I really like this. We've got Sheeta and Pazu realizing that Laputa just can't exist. The people of Laputa left it because they knew it was dangerous and that people were supposed to live on the earth. No one is supposed to be superior to anyone else. We're all just supposed to live together with nature. And they're like, it's too dangerous to exist. And if Muska is here, we can't allow it. So they use the destruction spell and it just destroys the bottom half of Laputa. It's really quite good.
I feel you maybe wouldn't get this with a Disney villain, but like Muska just kind of disappears. So he grabs his eyes and, he's clearly been blinded by this sort of brilliant light of the core of Laputa rising up and kind of letting the rest of it drop away. And kind of last we see is, he's grabbing his eyes as like the floor falls away from him. Now, presumably he falls to his death, but again, I don't know, it doesn't feel hugely satisfying. Is it bloodthirsty of me that I want to be 100% sure the villain's been killed? Is that mad?
I assumed the blinding light and him shielding himself was being vaporized by the destruction spell. I saw that as we were seeing him be killed. It could have been more horrific. We could have seen, the skin peeling off his bones and then the shot of his skeleton in the big last flash. That would have been a bit more satisfying, maybe.
And as the bottom of the castle collapses, it falls away from what we see are the roots of an enormous sky tree.
Yeah, like Laputa has been lost to this enormous tree over time. Like its roots were embedded in the city. But now with the city destroyed, like all that's left really is the tree.
Which the roots save Sheeta and Pazu from falling, and obviously the Sky Pirates turn up on there. It's kind of like a sort of flying version of, those little trolley
problems.
Trolley tray. No, the those trolleys that have like several trailers they use to move luggage around at airports.
Oh yeah.
They've got like a flying version of that, basically. They rescue Sheeta and Pazu. They show that they managed to grab some treasures, so all is not lost, and they can go back to committing probably various crimes, murders, assaults, kidnappings, etc. So that's all good. And I'll say this. I love it when a film knows when to end, because that's the end. We then just see, over the end credits, the magical sky tree floating off into space. Presumably it got faster because it managed to reach escape velocity.
Eventually just burns up in the atmosphere.
Yeah. Shut up, Ben. Just enjoy the magic. I know.
Does that happen the other way around? Can you burn up do you burn up leaving the atmosphere, or is it only entering the atmosphere?
Let's do some experiments. Get a tree. And yeah, as the Laputan sky tree flies off into space, the film ends. But before we pass our final judgment, Liam, is there anything else we need to talk about regarding Castle in the Sky?
There is just one thing, and once again, I'm so happy that these films are completely sexless.
But are they, Liam?
I'm so glad that the protagonists tend to be completely sexless. Like, I really enjoy that we have a male and female lead, and because they are children, it's just an entirely platonic relationship. There's never even a hint of, this would one day maybe bud into a romance. Maybe it is a cultural thing, but I just enjoy that, all the Ghibli films tend to focus on children being children, and there's often not a romantic element there. Well, there's not at all a romantic element there of the films I'm aware of. But we do need to decide which character we think is the sexiest, and I'm sure there's someone we can pick. So, as always, we're referring to characters that are unnecessarily or inappropriately sexualized for a family entertainment film. Again, I think this one probably is more accessible as a family entertainment film than Nausicaa. I think it skews a little bit younger while still being appreciated pretty much across the spectrum. So it would be inappropriate to have any kind of weird sexualization here. But Ben, who is the sexiest character in Castle in the Sky? And why is it Captain Dola, I guess?
So, what we talk about on this podcast is characters that are inappropriately sexualized. Now, I don't think Sheeta is in any way presented as sexualized to us as an audience. But, as discussed...
Okay, yeah, this is fair.
The villain, as I say, there's kind of like we're the only two remaining royal family members, so even though I'm a grown man and you're a young girl, tough. That is incredibly creepy and unpleasant, but I think it's meant to be. The sort of comedy side plot of Dola's sons having a crush on her is horrible, and if I could change anything about the film, it would be that 100% of the time. So even though I think characters in this film sexualize Sheeta, I don't think she's sexualized to us as an audience, thank God. So I'm going to go with Pazu's boss, because he's so hench, just by changing his posture slightly, he rips his shirt to shreds. And I think that's the closest we're going to get to any kind of sexualization in this film.
I forgot about that hunking brute of a man.
We also get in a great moment where I think it's his wife, or certainly someone in the village is like, oh yeah, and who's going to fix that shirt then?
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I think that's a pretty sexy character in an otherwise very sexless film. Thank God. And with sexiest character decided, it is time to decide whether or not we think Castle in the Sky does enough to earn a spot on the prestigious list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. As always, protocol dictates that we must first retrieve the scroll. So, we hop in our airship and head to the vault hidden in the sky and retrieve the scroll of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. Ben, am I writing Castle in the Sky on the list? Is it going to be the first non-Disney entry to the list of animated classics?
I really needed time to think about this one because there are so many good things in this film. I think the second half, where we spend time on the Sky Pirates ship and we get to know that sort of kooky cast of characters, and we develop this central relationship between Sheeta and Pazu, and then the discovery of Laputa, and the fact that even when we're spending time on there, it's still weird and unknowable. And I think the way everything about Laputa is handled in this film is perfect. I think the first half of this film is noticeably weaker, and I think it adds a lot less. Ultimately for me, I've gone where I normally go when I'm not sure, and I go, what was my emotional reaction to this film? And when I was speaking to someone else about this film, they used a phrase which really stuck with me, and it was that it left them feeling cold. And that's what I feel. At the end of that film, when I see that tree floating into space, I know it should be a magical, moving moment about how when we put aside conflict and destruction, something beautiful literally rises out of it. I know the pirates goofing about and sort of their scrappy ways of dealing with, a much more powerful force should be fun and funny. I don't find it particularly fun. And while there is definitely a sort of unknowable quality about Laputa, I don't fall in love with it as a space. Like, I find it really sort of quite haunting, but that's about it, and it's really the only part of the film that I have any emotional reaction to. So it feels like I'm watching a film and saying, I know I should feel X, Y, and Z while I'm watching these sequences, but I don't. And I was like, but I still think they're good sequences. But then I ask myself, well, do you still think they're good if they're not doing what they're intending to do? And since they don't, controversially, I am going to say, no, I don't think it does. And maybe that's just because I'm an emotionless psychopath. There's no but there. It might just be because of that.
I will admit, I'm not entirely sure myself. I think that this film is filled with lots of individual elements that I really like, but there's nothing here that I particularly love. And again, I think this has the problem that I had with Nausicaa, where I think I'm someone who needs a character arc to latch onto to really enjoy a film. If your story is building a world and, you can be telling a story still, but I'm just not going to engage with in it unless there is that human element for me to latch onto. And I think the protagonists here are far better than the character of Nausicaa. And yeah, we kind of get something with Pazu, of this small town boy who, he wants to find Laputa. Like, it's kind of like his father's legacy was that he never found it again. And he wants to do that, and he achieves that, but is that a character arc? Not really. He doesn't really overcome much in the film, and Sheeta herself just feels more of a prop to the story. And as a result, I think you've said it best, as a result, I'm just kind of left feeling a bit cold. It was really nice seeing, these storylines that I've seen ripped off over and over again, and seeing where they came from. It's genuinely fascinating, but being fascinated by a film doesn't mean I think it's a good film. It's got strong elements, and it's definitely a step in the right direction over Nausicaa, but it's still missing something for me to be considered a classic, so it's a no from me as well, I'm afraid.
And any Studio Ghibli fans who have listened to this podcast will probably never listen to it again, because we've not put Nausicaa or Castle in the Sky on the list. But of course, those are just our views. What do you think of Laputa, Castle in the Sky? Do you agree with the elements that me and Liam like in spite of our criticisms of the film? Is it something that just speaks to you universally and you love? Or do you fall into the same category as me and Liam, where it may have its strengths, but it doesn't quite do enough to be a classic, and maybe it leaves you feeling a bit cold too? As always, we're very keen to hear what your views are. Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics is available on SoundCloud, Spotify, a selection of other podcast hosting platforms, as well as YouTube, where we post memes, interviews, edits, and video versions of both our main podcast, Waly Gisnep's animated classics and our new series, Waly Gisnep's Top 10s, where we put together lists of our own personal favourite things in various categories from various animated films. And speaking of animated films, there are always plenty more to talk about. So Liam, what film are we looking at next time?
Well, Ben, as of yet, we have yet to add a non-Disney film to the list. But next up, we're going back to Bluth Studios with 1986's An American Tail, a film that I have a long history with and a great amount of love for when I was younger. So I'm very excited to revisit this film and find out if there is something truly great here and maybe a worthy addition to the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics, or if it is just rose-tinted nostalgia speaking as it was for The Secret of Nim. With that, all that's left to say is thank you very much for listening. We really do appreciate it. Remember to watch An American Tail and join us next time for Waly Gisnep's animated classics.